Corporate Law Lab. I'm Neil Taylor, host of the podcast and director of the Corporate Law Center at the University of Cincinnati College of Law. We're joined today by Chuck Tatelbaum, who I've known for many years, who was practicing for many years before I met him. Chuck is a bankruptcy lawyer, and we're going to talk to him quite a bit about his almost 60-year career in the law. We're also joined by Chris Caudell, one of our corporate law fellows, who will be taking some of the co-hosting duties. Welcome, Chuck.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here.
So you are a Baltimore kid, is that right?
I'm born there, went through school there, undergraduate and law school.
And then you did military service in between, or?
No, when I finished law school, I was fortunate enough to obtain a clerkship for a U.S. district judge in Baltimore. And after the year was over, within 4 days after I finished the clerkship, the draft board figured it out and sent me a draft notice. And so I had a choice of either 5 years of JAG or 2 years enlistment. And I enlisted in the Army for 2 years.
There was an active war at that point, right?
Well, some people called it a war. We were in Vietnam.
Right.
And I got very, very fortunate. When I went to basic training by random, they assigned me to armor rather than infantry so that I drove a tank and was at Fort Knox the whole time, ready to be mobilized to West Berlin in case the Russians invaded.
But Vietnam wasn't much of a tank war.
No, the terrain really did not accommodate our tanks at the time.
So you spent your entire time at Fort Knox,
Correct.
just down the road.
Yes, it was interesting because the first day in armor training, the sergeant told us how lucky we were. And we're saying, yeah, we're not going to Vietnam. And he said, no, because when you learn how to drive a tank, I'm teaching you a trade. So when you get out of here, you can operate a front end loader or a bulldozer, and you all are going to have much better professions than you had coming in.
You're just out of your law school and your clerkship.
Yes.
Have you ever been tempted to go drive the bulldozer instead of continuing to do this law thing?
No, not really, but it's there in case I ever need it.
Yeah, so that leads me right in with my pressing question because, here's the thing. I think bankruptcy as a practice area for like law students, prospective lawyers, I don't know that they, think of bankruptcy necessarily or go to law school, with the idea they're going to become a bankruptcy attorney. So how did you start your practice in bankruptcy? And, to contextualize that a little bit, how did you end up there? But further, what's the scope of your practice look like? And if anything you can give me there would be great.
Okay, well, it's not as exciting as you think. When I finished my time in the service, I was looking for a job and it was not the hiring season. And so the only job I could find was working for a firm that needed a lawyer to do bankruptcy work. And at that time, because there was no Chapter 11 and it was really just liquidation and a form of collection work, I mean, bankruptcy work was almost deemed lower than personal injury work. And I just happened to be at the right place in the right time because shortly after that, the Bankruptcy Code was enacted by Congress. Then Chapter 11 was created, and the whole dynamics of reorganization took place as a result of the enactment of the Bankruptcy Code. Because before that, the law was in effect since 1898, even after the Depression. So I sort of got into it by accident. When I did, there was a whole new young generation of attorneys who were willing to totally learn a whole new law because we also had to learn the Uniform Commercial Code, which came in at that time. And a lot of the more seasoned attorneys didn't want to learn a whole new two sets of laws. And we did, and we were at the forefront. At the time, I primarily did creditor work, but over the years, I learned you sort of have to do both, and that's what I did. And I just find it very challenging because every case is different, because every case you're in a different business or profession or industry.
Amazing. From my perspective, I don't know Congress to be this very large, productive body, but it feels like, Congress really kind of created a whole new area of practice for you guys. So that's really impressive. I didn't know.
Yeah, it took them about 4 years to do it. They had hearings and study groups. There was a subcommittee of both the Senate and the House. They had excellent staff attorneys working on it, brought in uh, professors, judges, attorneys to testify about what do we want in this law. I mean, literally created a whole new bankruptcy law, and it changed dramatically from what the prior Bankruptcy Act had been. So it was quite exciting, sort of frightening because nobody really knew everything that went on. And think about there was no case law. And I mean, when the bankruptcy reporter came out from Westlaw and you have a citation of 1 BR 12, um, it, it, it was very unique.
Amazing.
So, yeah, I remember there must have been a lot of people that, like, dropped everything to do that effort. I remember from my firm, I don't know if you ever knew Jerry Smith?
I know Jerry Smith very well.
Yeah,
He
and
was one
Jerry
of the
took us.
leaders.
Go ahead.
No, he was one of the leaders of his generation. Let's call it that way.
Yeah, and he took a sabbatical from the firm for, gosh, I think a year to just work on the project of drafting the code.
Yep. And fortunately, there were a number of attorneys from around the country who did that because the staff people for the House and the Senate, while brilliant young lawyers, had no institutional knowledge and no knowledge of business, and more importantly, no knowledge of what we needed to accomplish. And so people like Jerry, who came in with that institutional knowledge, helped them create and craft what needed to be done. Because, all due respect, we could not look to the senators or the Congress people to tell it what was needed.
You said earlier that you ended up doing a lot of creditor and debtor side work. I didn't realize that you could straddle those lines as easily. I know in my firm where Jerry worked, we always had the debtors.
Yeah, it depends on your client base. If you are representing banks or institutions, you're going to be on the creditor side. And we didn't do consumer work, which is a whole different thing because really you're divided consumer and commercial. And in Baltimore at the time, there were probably only 3 or 4 of us really, and then maybe 2 or 3 near Washington and Maryland that did that kind of law. So you did what you needed to do, and the attorney who was on the creditor side where you were on the debtor side may have your roles reversed 2 months later.
So I saw that you started in Baltimore with the Maryland license and got your Florida license somewhere in the mid 70s. When did you make the move to Florida?
I made the move in '86, and it was not a midlife crisis. The firm I had been with expanded from 15 when I was there to a little over 90. Very, very great firm. Everybody got along amazingly for a law firm. And they decided, because there was a big boom in Baltimore at the time, that 2 other law firms had decided to build their own office towers. And they decided they wanted to build their office tower, and the firm would take 2 floors and lease it all out. And I looked at the numbers as a bankruptcy lawyer and I said, no, this is not going to work. And they said, yes, it will. And you have to sign personally, or has to sign personally. And I just said I wouldn't. And I didn't want to move across town to compete against my old firm. So I had the Florida license and just said, I'm going to Florida.
Right, Internet Recon. And I saw that you represented Jerry Woolman, and at the time was the largest individual Chapter 11 case in the U.S. history. So, could you tell me how that happened and how you got that case and what the relationship was? Anything you can provide would be really cool.
Sure. Jerry Wallman was a developer at the time. He was in the midst of constructing the John Hancock building on Michigan Avenue in Chicago. He owned the yellow cabs all over Philadelphia. He owned Connie Mack Stadium in Philadelphia. He owned the Philadelphia Eagles, and he was doing a lot of developing. And he didn't do it in a corporate way. He did most of everything in his own name and his wife's name. And the Hancock building was about at 20 stories, and there was a defect in the superstructure. And they found an architectural defect that it wasn't his problem, it was the architect's problem, but Prudential, which was the financing company entity, called the loan, and that sort of toppled the whole thing. So Jerry lived in Silver Spring, Maryland, right outside of Washington. His regular counsel were in Philadelphia, where he had all of his activities. So they came to my firm and asked us to be co-counsel with them in the Chapter 11, which was filed in Baltimore, which at the time and for a long time afterwards was the largest single individual Chapter 11. The liabilities were exceeded $90 million, which at that time was just an astronomical amount for an individual. And several banks had liens on the stock of the Philadelphia Eagles. And as part of the case, as much as he didn't want to, the Eagles really didn't cash flow in those days. Unlike today, there were no big national TV contracts. While the Philadelphia market was pretty good, it wasn't astronomical. And the Eagles were a horrible team. They had a coach who was routinely booed. And so they we actually had a sale in the bankruptcy court. We sold it for $15 million. I remember I held the cashier's check for $15 million, which was very exciting when we did the closing, and we sold it to Leonard Toes, who was a trucking company executive in Philadelphia at the time.
The Eagles continue to be very bad after Toes is understood.
Yeah, yeah. Wallman was a very popular, charismatic person. Everybody loved him. Nobody liked Leonard Toes. And it, we sold Connie Mack, which then was later torn down. We sold the yellow cabs, and Wallman sold everything, and then had such an experience in Chapter 11 that he retooled and became a consultant for businesses that went into Chapter 11 to tell them what to do and what not to do. Really like the first chief restructuring officer that I ever heard of.
Wow. And then he did end up getting the Hancock Tower built, or did that go out as part of the bankruptcy as well?
That went out. We turned it back to Prudential because without their funding, there was a lawsuit against the architectural firm, which was Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, which at the time was one of the largest national architectural firms. And I don't remember it settled, but there was some astronomical amount they had to pay because of the engineering defect in the plans that caused the superstructure to begin to collapse.
Now, you mentioned a Philadelphia firm reaching out to someone closer to where he lived. It seems that happens quite often in bankruptcy, where when a big company goes bankrupt, everybody in town's conflicted out and you end up going somewhere else. Have you seen a lot of that?
We used to see a lot more people at the time. You didn't have internet. You communicated by telephone and mail, and that was it. And pro hoc vici motions were sort of not done. I mean, they were done, but there was a feeling that you needed to be local and know the judge and know the idiosyncrasies of each of the judges and everything. So you wanted the local feeling plus what you said. There were conflicts. So that's what was done. It's maybe less so now, but still goes on.
So we got to know each other when I was corporate counsel running the litigation at Abnet. And I always remember in other cases where we would be pursuing a debt and it would become apparent that the creditor was in trouble. I remember the first time going to my boss, David Burke, and saying, so my lawyer, civil litigator that I've hired says that we should put this company into an involuntary. And he said to me, have you talked to Chuck? And I think I said, who's Chuck at that point? Because I was only a month or two in. And he said, don't come to me with anything about bankruptcy that Titelbaum hasn't blessed. Then that's how I got to know you.
Well, thank you. That's very kind.
Yeah, and it was absolutely right, because I found that one of the things that was best about working with you is that you never asked me to throw bad money after good or good money after bad. We analyzed everything not on what could be done, but what was the smartest thing to do. And that sounds very obvious, but it's really not when your company is looking at not recovering a huge debt. your inclination is to just fight, 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 and sometimes you're just throwing money away. How did you get the kind of business acumen that made you that valuable to people like me?
I think it's just experience. I think there were many of us, not huge amount around the country. It was at the time right after the Bankruptcy Code came into effect that the American Bankruptcy Institute was formed. I was fortunate to be one of the founding directors. And we were a group of primarily younger lawyers who saw maybe, I don't know, with a cloudy crystal ball, what the future may be. And we had a network where we would call each other because we weren't competing and we would network around the country. What do you do in this situation? What would you do? And I think it was just very fortunate that I like to read. And again, I think a bankruptcy lawyer, to go back to your other point, a bankruptcy lawyer who litigates is different than a business litigator because the business litigator, as you pointed out, just wants to win. The bankruptcy lawyer is always balancing cost benefit because you know you're not going to get 100%. And you don't even think about bankruptcy, but you look at, am I going to collect this? And you don't want to have a client that's really upset because you spent a lot of money and gotten nowhere. So I think it's that philosophy as someone who does bankruptcy and litigation that you look at the end as well as the means and not just the means.
So if you are talking to corporate counsel, like I was, like Chris may be someday, what do they need to know about bankruptcy if they're not a quote bankruptcy lawyer?
I think they need to know, first of all, what's the extent of the secured debt? And for law students, the thing I always tell them is the Uniform Commercial Code is one of the many statutes, but certainly the UCC, which actually is pretty uniform throughout the country, is an integral part of the Bankruptcy Code because so many things have to deal with secured lending, secured credit, sales, secured credit, consignments, and things like that. So you have to know, is anyone else secured? Are you secured? If you're a vendor, do you have reclamation rights, which incorporate by reference, and what type of personal guarantees you have, and look at the whole global. And then you sort of do a pro forma of if this company were to go into bankruptcy, what would you collect?
And that informs whether or not you go how hard you go after them, right? Because I think, the one of the things I learned very early on was that collecting a great deal of money right before someone goes bankrupt is a great way to just cause yourself more trouble instead of less.
That's right, because you have a preference. And then what happens is you not only have to defend the preference recovery and also have to give back the money, but you have to pay the lawyers to pay money to give back money. And then you only have an unsecured claim, which may be pennies on the dollar. So to your point is when you're looking at this, you look at what the settlement opportunities are and you settle rather than litigate. And also you try to structure that payment so that it becomes bankruptcy preference proof.
I was wondering if, you as the practicing attorney would need to kind of balance how much you could get out of them without forcing them, to go all the way immediately, right? And completely out of business from that transaction. So I was curious about like, the balancing, but I think Chuck kind of answered it already, where you have to know how hard to push, but and when to do it, right? It's like this seems like a pretty like global perspective of the situation that you're dealing with to know really what you should do and when you should do it.
Right. So one concern is, do we want to push them into bankruptcy, which sometimes you do, again, depending on what you're able to learn about the secured. But the other thing is you also have to be careful when it's obvious that they're going into bankruptcy, right? Because that's when the preference is, what is the look back on preferences?
The look back for a preference is 90 days, but if it's to an insider and it's not the SEC definition of insider, it's bankruptcy code, which is much more expansive, it's 1 year. There's been a lot of litigation because an insider in bankruptcy can be a creditor that has unique knowledge and like a lender that's helping to control pay this vendor, don't pay this vendor, that bank can become an insider. And then everything that went on within a year can be undone. So there are a lot of moving parts as to who you represent and what strategies to follow.
We listed in our outline a number of different highlights of your career. And in a lot of them where you achieved full payment for your client. Are those one-offs, or is there something special that you came up with for dealing with, I don't know, pick one, Saab or one of the others, where you were able to get a complete recovery as opposed to normal bankruptcy where you get a piece of a piece of a piece?
I think I wish I could take full credit, which I really can't. Obviously, I did the right things, but in those situations, I was representing a secured creditor that had adequate collateral. And so the key was maximizing the liquidation of the collateral in order to get paid. I mean, there was one case representing Ally Financial, a auto dealer chain named Bill Hurd. It was in 2008 at the financial crisis. They had 14 Chevrolet stores. They sold 7% of all the Chevrolets in the country, and we had a lien on 10 of the 14 stores. We were able to sell all 10 of our stores in the bankruptcy court, and that helped to pay. And then on another store, there was a bank in Columbus, Georgia, that had made a fatal mistake in their financing statement, which was they put an address for the collateral, and it said all of the dealership collateral located at such and such. Well, the dealership had moved. Nobody filed an amended financing statement. So their lien for like $10 million was voided, and we had a backup. And so we were secondary. So we then got the proceeds of that sale. Luck. It turned out that there was a huge inventory when Saab went bankrupt in Sweden. There was a huge inventory of Saab vehicles at the port of Newark, and the port of Los Angeles, and Saabs were cult vehicles. And all of a sudden, everybody wanted one. Well, we could only sell to dealers, but dealers all over the country wanted to buy them because they had customers that were willing to pay anything to get one of the last Saabs. There was no way to predict that. So I wish I could say it was all skill, but I can't. A lot of it is just luck, timing, and who knows what happens.
And somebody else making a great mistake for
Yes.
you, for your client,
Well,
right? Sometimes.
and I think this is important, especially for law students, being meticulous. And that is being meticulous and noticing that two numbers in an address on a financing statement were different than the current address. And if somebody, which happened to be me, hadn't have noticed it, the lien wouldn't have been avoided. So you need to be meticulous, you need to be anal, you need to be compulsive, whatever it is. But I've always believed that the attorney who wins is the attorney who's the most prepared, not necessarily the attorney with the best case.
There's nothing you can do if the other side's smarter than you, but you can avoid them being more prepared than you.
That's right. Very, very, very well said.
Anecdotally, because, Chuck mentioned the cult-like following of Sobs, and then he said the word detail as well, so my mind connected these pieces. Sobs are the coolest cars. I am a member of the Saab cult, and they're just so quirky, and they have odd little details about them that made them so interesting, like, the ignition was, like, in the center console, and, like, the cup holders came out of the vent. They're just really cool cars, so he's really right about the cult thing, and I'm a proud member.
Well, yeah, and again, that really helped us, and also dealing with a lot of the issues in Europe because we had liens in Spain, France, Germany, and being able to use international things and working with local attorneys over there to get appropriate recoveries.
You mentioned your being a founding member of the Bankruptcy Institute and just mentioning your working internationally. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you spent, what was it, a month in Eastern Europe after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the breakup of the
Well,
Warsaw Pact?
longer, actually longer than that, um,
Okay.
two different occasions. One stint in Slovakia and one stint in Croatia, it actually came through one of the attorneys who had been the attorney for the Senate Judiciary Committee on the Bankruptcy Code, then went to work for the State Department in USAID of blessed memory. And it was then when communism fell in all the Eastern European countries and they didn't have any business laws. And they knew if they didn't establish business laws, there would be no investment by Western businesses. So I went over there first to Croatia and then Slovakia to work with teams of professors and judges and lawyers from all over, and we helped create the business laws for those two countries.
So how much did you copy paste and how much did you say, here's something I don't like about the way we did it in the US. Maybe we can do it better here in Slovakia or Croatia.
About 60%.
Okay. That's a
Mostly,
that's a good number
mostly
pulled from the air, but what do you mean? Tell me some details.
we took a lot from our counterparts in Germany. Way back in the 80s, I had been an implant in Tokyo for when the Japanese were developing, they bought golf courses and they bought the Westin hotel chain, they bought the Plaza in New York, this one company, because there were really no communications except by fax with a 12-hour time difference. I went and became an implant over there, and I learned a lot about Japanese contract law, which is very precise because what they do is they assume there's never going to be litigation. You cover everything in the agreement. So we actually use some principles from Japanese, but a lot more from German, which again is a lot less litigious than the US and more culturally close to, um, Slovakia and Croatia.
How do you make a bankruptcy code less litigious than the one we have?
Well, it really wasn't bankrupt. We put in business laws. I remember sitting with the Croatian Supreme Court the first time. We had multiple meetings with them. Very, very smart judicial people. 9 judges were all sitting with headphones on because there was simultaneous translation because they didn't speak English. And the whole point, if you had a question, you raised your hand. And so I'm talking and I said something about a mortgage and hands go up. Okay, what? What is a mortgage? Because the state had provided them all their money. They didn't know what a mortgage was. And so the laws had to really start from ground zero on business because they had nothing.
Opportunity.
It was. Financially, it was a disaster. I was single. I enjoyed being over there. I was on leave from the firm. But it was an experience that could not be duplicated, and I don't regret a minute of it.
So let's talk about some of your other interesting extracurriculars. I discovered after having known you for quite some time that you are, I don't think we called it a foodie back then, but you're definitely one of them, right?
Yep.
And you
Good memory.
you actually wrote a column, I think in Clearwater?
Yes, very good memory. St. Pete, Clearwater, yes. After I got out of the service, I had the GI Bill. I'd already been to law school. So I used it to go to chef school at night for a couple of years, learned that I did not want to be a chef. They had worse hours than lawyers. But then I befriended the food critic for the St. Pete Times, which was the best paper in Florida. It's now Tampa Bay Times, probably still is. And I became her companion. When she moved to the West Coast for another job, she convinced the paper to let me take over. And for 2 years, I wrote the Thursday restaurant critic column under a fake byline.
So what was it like going into restaurants? Did people realize you were the critic or did you manage to keep yourself under wraps?
No, the whole point was I never to let them know. I used a woman's byline. I learned by communicating with other critics. For instance, I had 7 different names for reservations. I had a Sunday name, a Monday name, a Tuesday name, so that if I made a reservation for a Wednesday night, I'd make it in that name. So when I got to the restaurant, I knew that name, always paid in cash, and never took notes that they could see me taking notes because there were no PDAs or cell phones. So I would have to hide and take little notes. And I had to go to every restaurant at least twice. And if it was really, really good or really, really bad, I went 3 times. And the paper was great because they didn't care if the restaurants advertised or not. I could say what I thought. One of the things, no alcohol, but I would look at the wine list and just see what the prices were and what they had. And I assumed they kept the wine appropriately. So I would talk about wine as if for pairing and stuff, as if I had it, but I wouldn't do it. And I would pay in cash.
How was writing a column? Which of your legal writing skills did you have to throw out to write a food column?
Well, I had to, I don't want to say dumb it down, but remember who my audience was. As you know, St. Pete Clearwater has a huge amount of senior citizens. So it also had to do with what restaurants I picked. 1 out of every 8, I had to do an early bird. And the only way I could do an early bird was I had a neighbor who I swore to secrecy, who looked like she was a grandmother, a little gray-haired lady, swore her to secrecy, and I'd go with her so I wouldn't stand out going to dinner at 4 o'clock.
Okay, that's a great segue to clown college. You're the first guest for sure that has been to clown college. What is
Well, I've been fortunate, just like I had represented Avnet for many years. I'm in my 35th year of representing Macy's. And I would say about 15 years ago, I was in New York. We'd just finished a case, and I was having dinner with the counsel who I dealt with. And I said to him, Mitch, this sounds crazy, but I was in the high school drama club. I played music. How do you get in the parade? I would love to be a clown in the parade. And he looks at me. He said, You're serious? I said, I am. He said, Well, you're really fortunate because I'm Macy's counsel. One of my assignments is the entertainment group, which does the 4th of July fireworks and the parade. And I can sponsor you because we all get to sponsor someone, but you have to go to a clown school for liability purposes to get approved that you know what to do, what not to do, and stuff like that. So, without telling my wife, I signed us both up for Clown University, which is part of the Big Apple Circus in New York, because they have a deal with Macy's. And we went, we passed, and I did the first year we both did it. It was a little taxing for her, plus the fact she's 5 foot, maybe a half an inch, and the costumes are not meant for someone that small. And she had to waddle in them. First year, we were breakfast clowns behind the Pillsbury Doughboy balloon. I was a 5 foot piece of toast and she was a stick of butter. And the bottom of the stick of butter came out below her calves. So for 5 miles, she had to waddle behind everyone. So she said, enough. And I did it for 10 years. The only reason I stopped is all of my sponsors retired and I haven't been like another sponsor because I only get to sponsor one, but I'd go back in a heartbeat if I could.
That's great. So to switch to a completely different subject, we were talking a few weeks ago. I saw an article in the New York Times and then another one in Bloomberg, and I said, I'm pretty sure that Chuck put that on the. You just put your clown nose on. I looked up from my notes. I'm like, wait a minute, what happened
Not
there?
hallucinating.
Not hallucinating, really is there. And I saw something and I said, I'm pretty sure that Chuck wrote that on LinkedIn months ago. And it was about the share of subprime borrowers who are in default on their auto loans.
Yes.
I'll steal a line from EJ Dionne, having correctly predicted 5 of the last 2 recessions. I tend to not take my own counsel on these things and look to people like you. Why is that significant other than to those people?
The reason is that it's historically, and we see it as bankruptcy lawyers, when consumers are having difficulties, they may not pay the doctor. They may not pay the credit card because they have several of them and they just pay the minimum monthly. Even if they don't pay their mortgage, it takes so long to foreclose. But the last debt that they don't pay is their car because they know in 45 days it's going to be repossessed. And that's their ticket to going to work, ticket taking kids to school. It's their lifeline. So when you don't pay your car, that means you're really in trouble. And when you have, as we have now, and now it's extended a little past subprime into the regular, the highest default rate since the 2007 2008 financial crisis, it shows that consumers are really hurting. Recently, I heard actually on a Planet Money podcast the explanation of the K factor, which is if you take the letter K, you have one arm going northeast and one going southeast. And you figure there's a percentage of the people who are financially secure are up and the people who are insecure are down. It's usually about 60-40. Now it is somewhere around 20% are financially secure and 80% are financially insecure. And we're seeing this. So, there's so many people that think the stock market is the predictor of the economy. And that's really what we've been seeing, especially having to do with things like defaults on auto loans.
Yeah, I saw a prediction yesterday at Bloomberg that the stock market, at least one prognosticator said, "Oh, it's going to be great. Everything is up and to the right." And I'm thinking the stock market, it seems to have become disconnected from the experience of everyday people. Has it always been that way or is it getting worse?
But it's getting much worse because, as I said, in the K factor, it was closer to this. But now the interest rates have been very high on credit card debt. And so people are paying the minimum. At today's interest rate, which is around 21% if you're paying credit card debt, with the minimum, it takes over 40 years to pay it off if you just pay the minimum. And with the ease of credit, a lot of people have a lot of credit card debts and they're balancing back and forth, but they're really not getting anywhere. And with food being higher and beef prices being up and all of the other things that are together, it's just not working. And so you have the stock market inflating, 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 and then you have the everyday people that are having more and more difficulty in meeting ordinary needs.
So we're sitting here in a law school. You have, I think you're now chair of the board of trustees of Nova Southeast. Is that right?
Law school, yes.
Yeah. How did you get involved with that?
Well, I had been on the board of Maryland Law School. I had taught there as an adjunct for 7 years and then continued on because I loved the school. And I think my legal education there made me partially what I am. I love the education there. So I stayed on the board even when I was in Florida, chaired a few committees, and one of my neighbors across the street, who is chief appellate judge for our district, was the chair of the Nova board. And she said to me, we have an opening on the board. Why don't you come on? We only have Nova graduates on our board. We want some outside experience. And so I agreed to do it. And I've been on for 9 years. And I don't know if you've ever seen the Powerball drawing where they have all the balls going around and then there's a vacuum and one gets sucked up. Well, I was all the board members, and then all of a sudden there was a vacuum and I got sucked up to be the chair. And so I took over as chair in May, at which point, nothing to do with it, the dean resigned. So I am the chair in the midst of now working on finding a new dean for the law school, which takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, and it's very rewarding, uh, but it's a whole new experience for me.
Amazing. So you are into your 80s now,
82,
82. Okay. You'll be coming up on your 60th anniversary next year of passing the bar.
correct.
So when we talk a lot about work-life balance these days, I don't know if you're the guy we should be talking to, but on the other hand, maybe we should because you still maintain the passion for it after 60 years. How have you done that?
Well, I mean, I'm not working as intensively as I used to. I mean, I don't work the 7 days, which occasionally I had to. I'm lucky I'm in a firm with great people to help me. We also have 5 of us that are over 80 that work full time here as partners in the law firm. It is creating the work life balance. We all enjoy doing what we're doing. I'm doing less intense, handing it off, being more selective in the cases that I take in. But all of us, mostly I speak for myself, I enjoy what I do, but I enjoy other things. I enjoy some hobbies, and my wife and I like to travel. Next summer, I'm doing an archaeological dig in Hot Springs, South Dakota that I ran across that I want to do. It's just balancing of having something fun to do, but still working. But I also have to say that being able to work remotely is a godsend because that allows me to be away anywhere in the world virtually and still be able to work and not create a problem.
So you still travel for work?
Yeah, not as much. After COVID, most of the bankruptcy courts stayed on Zoom. The Chamber of Commerce, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, strongly lobbied the administrative office of the courts to stay on Zoom so that the lawyers wouldn't have to travel all over the country. It would save the creditor companies millions of dollars for their attorneys not having to travel halfway across the country for a 30-minute hearing. And so now, with the hearings in most bankruptcy courts being on Zoom, the traveling has been knocked down by 90%.
Wow, that's great. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
it
can't t
is.
because I can't tell you how many air miles I've got on me for, going to a 2 or 3-hour meeting.
Yeah, I just remember when you were doing it, how many times I would call and you would be somewhere at a meeting, not just necessarily in an Avnet, but somewhere for a meeting with a customer or something. And but that was the way to do it. We didn't do it by phone, and we certainly didn't have any type of virtual meeting available.
Yeah, and I had gold cards in every airline there was, but
Yeah.
that was that wasn't the perk it sounded like, right?
Everybody used to think it's so glamorous, and I say, yeah. Uh, no disrespect to Hampton Inn, but you're in a Hampton Inn, the room keeps getting smaller every night.
Yeah, as I've said to people that conference rooms and hotel rooms are remarkably same all over the world. They're just a little bit chintzier and a little bit nicer in some places than others, but being in a conference room, going from conference room to hotel room to conference room to hotel room, it really doesn't matter whether it's in Delhi, India, or, Phoenix, Arizona. It's still the same experience.
Yeah. I once had a week-long deposition in St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands, and everybody saying, "Oh my god, you're gonna be what a resort area," and I think, "No." We You leave the conference room with the deposition that has no windows, you go to a hotel which is not on the beach, and you order in a pizza to prepare for the next day. You go to sleep and you get up the next day. I never saw the beach the whole week I was there. I never saw anything other than the windowless conference room and the virtually windowless hotel room.
Okay, so let's end on a happier note than that. We were talking before we started about one of your friends, and I only got to know that you were friends with him shortly after he died when you said you'd had the experience of trying to arrange a good friend's funeral through the Archbishop of Baltimore, and I turned and said, "You knew Johnny Unitas?"
Yeah,
So how
I
did you
was
get to know Johnny Unitas?
one day I got a call from an accountant, a very prominent accountant in Baltimore, who said, I have a client that's involved with a joint venture that's in trouble, and I need you to meet with him. Well, in those days, we didn't do conflict checks. You didn't do anything. I said, fine, come in tomorrow at 1 o'clock. And I didn't ask who the client was. I knew who the accountant was. And 1 o'clock, the switchboard calls and said, Mr. Walpuff is here. Do you know who's with him? I said, yeah, his client. But do you know who it is? I said, no, it's Johnny Unitas. And of course, he was a legend in Baltimore, and with his flat top, I mean, tall, very identifiable. And so I helped him on the thing and it worked out very well. And we clicked as a personality. I never, in the whole time, in the 30 years I represented him, people didn't know I represented him. We worked as a team. Many times he would meet at my house because he didn't want to go downtown and be seen because people would just mob him and everything else. So we became very good friends. And for 30 years, I represented him. And when we did his estate, he wanted me to be the trustee along with his wife because he was concerned. His wife's very, very smart, but he was concerned that people would try to victimize her or get her into deals or do something like that. And he also had 3 kids, and very wisely, who were all minors at the time. When he did the will, he didn't want his wife having to say yes, no to the kids on giving them money. So we became trustees. He died very untimely with a unknown, undisclosed heart condition at the time at age 69. So one of the provisions was I had to arrange the funeral, as you mentioned. He was very devout Catholic, did a lot of work for the church. And so I had to arrange for his funeral. They said, I called to arrange for the funeral, and they said, "Oh, well, you got to go to a funeral home." I said, "No, no, no, it's Johnny United." "Oh, you'll be at the main cathedral. Let you talk to the bishop." And I talked to the bishop. The bishop said, "Nope, you got to talk to the cardinal." And I get on the phone. I'd never talked to a cardinal before. Because Baltimore is one of the biggest Catholic cities in the country. And I said eminence. I didn't know if that was what you call them. And so we're talking. It was a Wednesday, and he says, "Okay, I'm going to say the mass. We're going to do the funeral in the main cathedral in Baltimore on Monday." And I said, "Eminence, there's a problem with Monday." And he says, "What's that?" I said, "Well, it's Yom Kippur." The cardinal says, "Mr. Tatelbaum, in case you don't know, the Catholics don't celebrate that holiday." And I said, "Yeah, I know that, but there are a lot of people, including myself, that would like to be there." So he moved it to the next day. And we had over 3,000 people at the church and outside for the funeral. His burial is in a secret place. There are probably only 15 of us that know where it is because his widow didn't want everybody going to, especially early on, looking at Johnny Unitas's grave. And so we have a small marker, and that's the family plot. Since then, his wife they had a business, a memorabilia business, which continued because they also marketed the Babe Ruth name because she was a friend from Baltimore. And so I've continued to do that since he passed away in 2002.
I mean, I never knew that you knew him until after he had died. And, we talked every day for years.
And that was the deal I made with him. And we were good friends. I spent every Thanksgiving at their house, but the whole deal was he was a very private person, and I respected that, and that's one of the reasons we got along so well.
So I have an important follow-up there. I was born a Colts fan. I don't know if I was born a Colts fan, but from my earliest memories, I was a Colts fan until the moving vans in the middle of the night took the Colts to Indiana. So have you stuck with the Colts, or did you switch your allegiance to the Ravens when we managed to pilfer Cleveland's team?
I am a Ravens fan only because nobody in Baltimore would have anything to do with the Colts. If you recall, Mayflower was the moving company because they were from Indianapolis that moved the Colts out in the middle of the night. The Mayflower franchisee had to close in Baltimore because nobody would use them.
Wow.
They Maryland National Bank used to pass out stickers that everybody put on the car. 2 of them. One of them was Nuke Bob Irsay, who was the guy who moved them, and the other one was, I remember it had to be subtle, Will Rogers never met Bob Irsay, 'cause Will Rogers said, "I never met a man I didn't like."
I was living in Indiana when that happened, and it was the most annoying thing ever to have all these people excited about getting a team. And I'm like, no, no, you are stealing a team. And I will never root for them again, no matter what.
It was terrible for Baltimore because Baltimore is a very blue collar town, and people passed along the seats by will and everything. And it was like profaning the family name
Yeah.
when he did that, especially the way he did it.
Yeah. Well, okay. So the big finish coming here. If you could go back to what you were worried about as a young lawyer or as a law student that you really shouldn't have been, what would you say to today's law students that they might be concerned about that they should probably just kind of let go because it's going to work out?
I'd say the bar exam, and I'm not saying be nonchalant, but and I know from my Nova experience with everything we have with bar prep and all the studies I've read, and I've seen it, is if you're doing your work as you go along and you're keeping up to it and you do your bar review and you take the bar review test and you have your mentors or whatever the school has available, you're going to pass. And I think that I fretted like mad. My senior year, I was so afraid that I had forgotten criminal law from, my 1L days, and different things. I didn't remember the rule against perpetuities and everything else. And I almost talked myself into a bad frenzy even before I started studying for the bar. And then when I studied for the bar, I way overdid it. And so I think it's important. It's important to do as well as you can. But once you take the bar and pass, nobody cares what you got on the exam.
Yeah, right. No, no, you should not be trying to win the bar exam. It's a pass, not a win.
No. And so I think that was the biggest thing. I really loved law school because I had great professors and it was the first time because undergraduate didn't have it where we had dialogues and you learned to be an advocate, you learned how to write. We really learned stuff rather than just regurgitating stuff. So but I'll go back undergraduate. What I should have done is taken business law, business courses. I was a political science major because that's what they told me to do. And I wish I had had more economics and accounting, but nothing I could do about that either.
I was a poli-sci major too, but I did figure it out. But unfortunately, I accidentally graduated with my poli-sci degree before I could finish my finance degree, and I was out of money anyway.
Yeah. Well, my last semester in undergraduate, I took freshman accounting, and that was the most important course I ever took in college.
Chris, anything else?
No, I think the advice for law students is a great one, and, as a somebody who is perpetually scared of taking the bar in a year and a half or so, I appreciate that.
All right. Chuck, thank you so much for your time. It's great to see you again, and we'll be in touch very soon.
I hope so. Thank you. I appreciate it. Great questions.
Thank you.